Hello, 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 gentlemen. Apologies for the delay leaving one and joining your Zoom. A little bit backwards, let's just say, but if you don't mind, I'd love to introduce you both.
Sure, let's go for it.
All right, next up, everyone, please put a big virtual hands together for this server-side chat. You've probably heard of a fireside chat, but this is a security conference. We're gonna go a little on-prem and call this a server-side chat. Now, this is a conversation between two founders who both have each built open source project that changed how teams work. One from cloud security, one from search infrastructure, different domains, but the same ethos. Build it in the open, solve for the user, and scale with the community. First up, Toni de la Fuente, founder of Prowler. He built what he built, Prowler, because he wanted something simple, something introspectable, a way of knowing what was happening in his AWS environment without jumping through the hoops of black boxes. What started as a few bash scripts, literally, turned into the backbone of cloud security for thousands of organizations and a movement that is growing faster every day, of which this conference is an example. And joining him, please once again put your hands together for Shay Banon, founder of Elastic. Shay started Elastic by building a scalable, distributed version of Lucene, an open source search query engine. What began as an engineering project grew into Elasticsearch, and from there, a company that powers search and observability for teams around the world. If you've logged it, searched it, or visualized it, chances are you've touched something Shay helped build. And on a personal note, I was there on the Embarcadero in San Francisco when Elastic became Elastic at their user conference. So this is going to be a great chat for me to watch. These two are going to talk about what it takes to lead open source projects, the trade-offs of building in public, and how to keep your principles intact as you scale. So please give a warm welcome, shout out in the chat for Toni de la Fuente and Shay Banon. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Matt. Thanks, Shay, for joining us today in this very special day for us and for the whole community, right? For the whole open source community related to the cloud. So we have about 20 minutes to talk about many different things. You know that every time that I have time with you, I ask you a lot of questions. So today is not going to be different, but we have less time probably. So yeah. And I'm going to start a little bit hardcore with questions. Considering that you are one of the the leaders of open source since a long time ago, and with a very important product and company for the whole internet, and giving your connection and the DNA of Elastic in the cloud and in the cloud security. Please share your vision of what do you think about the open source evolving and how it's evolving in cloud security landscape, and what do you recommend organizations to do when they want to go to the cloud and start using open source?
I think it's a great question. First of all, I'll start with saying, obviously, agreeing with you that I'm a huge proponent of open source. And whenever there's like two products, I would always gravitate towards the open source one. And I think over the years, I don't know, 25, almost 30 years of doing open source myself, I've seen how companies built a level of trust with open source to just makes it just a wonderful solution for many of their challenges. In the early days, I think there were questions around, is open source enterprise ready? All the way to, is open source the right way to develop security products? I think if we fast forward to today, both of these cases have been proven to be that open source is the best way to deliver software. I think for us, for example, even within the security space, we build an open source SIEM. So all of our detection rules are in the open. So it's not only about the product itself, it's all the content around it. That has created such a wonderful ecosystem of community collaborating around it. I think the cloud environment is very complex. Many companies have to deal with one cloud if they're lucky, but mostly they have to deal with multiple clouds. And that complexity tends to be simplified heavily thanks to open source. The ability to get the expert in one aspect of one cloud vendor helping collaborate on the best way to secure it is something that no single company can go and do. And I think that's the huge advantage that an open source cloud security product can have to its users.
Yeah, so complexity when it comes to using multiple clouds is a factor, is for the good or for the bad, but it's something to have into account. So what would you recommend to organizations that are moving to the cloud or are already in the cloud, how should they adopt their security? I mean, you guys have been a game changer for search, right? And when it comes to cloud, what is the point of making security easier when it comes to multi-cloud?
Well, I think first of all, you have to use a product that inherently support multi-cloud deployments. By the way, all of the large enterprises that I talk to have a multi-cloud strategy or an on-prem, self-managed and multi-cloud. And I think that this is just a critical capability that organizations today look for, including even small companies. I think with what goes on in the world today, you'll see more clouds compared to less, including private cloud, and the ability to go and secure that, I think, is critical. I think you just need to have a product that seamlessly allow you, and hopefully in a very simple way, allow you to treat all clouds as one, but also secure them as if they were the only cloud product that you support. You see what I mean? It's like every single one has an object store, every single one has whatever, a Kubernetes deployment or things along those lines. But so there's some commonalities around how you secure them, but there's also a lot of differences. And those differences tends to be the one that gets exploited sometimes by bad actors. And those are the ones that are like critical to protect.
Yeah, a little bit related to that point that all the cloud providers are kind of providing the same type of services, but at the same time, the vendors and the open source kind of vendors are also building open ecosystems. So we can see a lot of security, observability, and data in giant platforms. That is good sometimes, but at the same time, what do you think about those giant platforms in an open source world? Do they leave room for open source initiatives?
I think so. I mean, these giant platforms, I don't think they're like black boxes. They tend to be composed by just multiple tools and systems, and great open source tools ends up being embedded in such systems. At least for Elastic, for example, we became the de facto way, definitely for how people do search. Now with Gen AI, we became the de facto way to do vector databases, and it's all in the open, it's all open source, and it's amazing. Same thing for logging or for storing security events. So I think these like very large platforms of deployments that companies have are composed of many different tools, from the operating system up, from Linux to containers to Kubernetes, and most of them are built on open source. So it's only natural to try to protect them using open source. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about you and your experience in open source, because
Sure.
I mean, here we are a big group of open source lovers and of course cloud practitioners and cloud security practitioners, and you have experience in all that stuff. So if you were building your first open source security tool today, okay, not as a company, just you as a project, okay, what would you do, and what would you do different to what you did already with Elastic?
Oh, um, well, I think I'll try to find a market or a place that needs open source, right? And this tends to be obviously a place where existing open source tools might not be good enough, or they might be trying to solve yesterday's problem versus tomorrow's opportunity. And they don't move or adapt very quickly, right? It's like, so they're not like timeless like Postgres or hopefully Elasticsearch as well. Like they don't stay up to date. And it's always good also that there's like a big commercial company that exists versus a lot of small ones, because typically when that happens, for us, for example, it was Splunk as an example in the observability and security space. People tend to not like them that much if there's like a major vendor in the space. And then open source is just like great. It comes in, it disrupts. It starts typically with an augmentation play, if that makes sense. It's like, oh, just deploy it next to the system and do the less important thing with that system and what have you. And then it grows and grows and grows to become the place where users rely on. So I'll try to find like this type of signals, if that makes sense, in the area that I would try to build open source tool. I think trying to solve your own challenge. I was trying to build a recipe search app for my wife, and that's how I got into search. You try to secure your cloud solution using Bash script, so nothing beats like passion and commitment and knowing the space and then really feeling very connected to it. It comes across, especially when you build communities. I don't know, but things to be aware of or be concerned about. I don't know about Elastic. I think we've been very successful as a company. I think you want to think a bit about the type of community that you would want to build. What's the DNA of it? How does it react? How do you talk to your users? How do users talk to other users, committers, things along those lines? Those things matter a lot. I think you'll want to think a bit about open source licensing and how does that work, especially if you want to
Yeah.
protect your open source project brand or things like that.
I wanted
And yeah,
to
yeah,
ask you about that later, but yeah,
yeah,
tell me more about that because I wanted
sure.
to know, if you have to pick a license now, what would you do?
So it's interesting, right? We went through a journey of starting with Apache 2 license, open source. We trademark obviously our system and everything, but sadly, AWS didn't only take the open source software, which is totally fine and legal. They also took our brand, right, and basically called it Amazon Elasticsearch. That was something that was a bit surprising, coming from an old school open source. It's like you don't take the brand. It's okay to take the software, but not the brand. So we felt like eventually that we had to go and change the license. But then a year ago, we moved back to open source because the environment has changed. And I think we helped shape some of the push and pulls, if that makes sense, between large cloud companies or large enterprise companies and open source software. So we moved back to AGPL. And I think AGPL is a good license to help protect your software, not only through brand. Obviously, you should do all the brand stuff, right? Trademark it, enforce it, and things like that. But also, it sends a very strong signal to the rest of the vendors to say, hey, like if you're gonna embed us and gonna start to treat it as if it's your product, like let's talk. And I think it's good enough protection while still being open source. I think it's like there's almost like a metaphysical question around what is open source, and it seems like the community of users, especially younger users, are more okay with things that are not like OSI approved open source, like Llama and others, and just calling it open source. Which, to be honest, like I think sustainable, wonderful, delightful open source project has more open source in its DNA versus the licensed thing or something like that. It's like it's how much you develop in the open, how much you engage with the community, how much the people really carry this through. I think that matters more compared to one certificate or another.
So yeah, in that matter, talking about a little bit about community. So the cloud security or cloud open source community is, I see that a little bit different to the old days of open source and the communities, right? So I wanted to also to know what has been your journey from those early days of Lucene that you started Elastic, that open source community compared to the cloud security or cloud open source related community, because we see a lot of differences because now the operating system is different, let's say, but I wanted to know more about your journey and your experience on that.
Yeah, I think there's differences in any like substrate of an open source implementation or market or ecosystem or environment. I think there's like constant truth. Right? Like you talked about the community, you talked about access to code, trust in the code, trust in the developers, the ability to go and shape the speed of the development thanks to the intelligence of the masses, right, including yourself. The fact that typically most open source software have like a strong company that pushes them, right, like whether we want to or not, like that's what ends up happening. We're the largest committer not only to Elasticsearch but to Apache Lucene, and we push Apache Lucene forward as much as possible, right? So it's like this is important. I'm curious about you because we do see many different type of users also for us, right? Like there's search users or search developers. There's SREs that use Elastic open source to monitor their logs and their infrastructure, and there's like threat hunters that uses Elastic to do threat hunting as a SIM tool, if you will. Those are very different users, but many of them get drawn to open source for like the same basic reasons. You engage with them slightly differently. So I'm curious, when you say cloud security users are different, I'm curious what's the delta that you see there?
Well, I see that basically back in the days there was kind of everything free, and when you are in the cloud, actually nothing is free at the end of the day, because you are paying at least the provider, right? That was my point, and that is why I see that the community different. But well, we are this has been so quick, running totally. Almost out of time. I don't know if you want to add something else as a closing this small talk.
No, I'm excited to join the conference, and hopefully everybody will enjoy the work. I'm excited about Prowler and the work that you're doing. Always good to see more successful open source companies in the world, especially in the security space, which I think can always use more open source versus less. And thank you very much for hosting me.
Thank you, Shay. Thank you very much for making the time. Cheers. And for your support. Cheers.
Cheers. Ciao.